he's doing and all that. So he ascended to heaven. We're waiting for his return. So where Muhammad comes in about 600 years later, after Jesus. So he comes as, he's the guy who actually, 5 or 6 of them, we all know the story of Jesus and the story about the Muhammad, not so much. He's not as well known, well, it is in their religion and stuff, but they're actually, Muhammad thinks, or they think that 5 or 6 people were in a cave and they put them to sleep, but they don't know, they thought they went to sleep and pray, but they actually was like almost like 300 years or so, plus 9 or minus 9, they don't know exactly, with a dog seeing the door to the cave, but the angel Gabriel. So what is between them two? Actually, angel Gabriel was telling Mary, like she was going to be pregnant, where here is the Muslims use that, or the Muhammad, he receives Quran as a channel from angel Gabriel, so there is similarities in both of them. They are both preaching love, where the Christians actually are turning and converting into Muslim, and yeah, the differences in that. But he was a really, I'm talking about Muhammad right now, he was a religious leader, he was a businessman. Yeah, so he's the prophet of God. It ended in Medina. He was poisoned and all that. So he married several wives. He's not cheap that way.
Okay, he had several wives, and he got.
Muhammad goes and marries. Actually, he can have as many wives as he wants. So he's more like how he brings his religion, and he sets it up for the future generation and religion to do so. He gives the guys, but he's funny because the only person that is a female or in the Quran is Mary. So Mary is like that's the only person that is a female figure in Quran is Mary. So they have Mary in common, both religious, him and the Muslims and the Catholics and the Christians. So yeah, it kind of gives me a kind of, how did that just happen? Why is the angel Gabriel in both religions there? You know what I mean?
Yes. Actually, it's something I've been very aware of for years. I researched Islam for some of my prophecy and, voices from the past, how religions original, way back, how they have been foundational in society, and become very aware of the similarities as both of those are, and I actually have that in my own segment, interestingly enough, that both religions are an offshoot or branched from Judaism as their foundation.
Yeah, it brings it right in, right?
It
because,
does.
You know what I mean? It's like a stream of love, but how people take it and, you know what I mean? Like turn it and convert it and mold it into something to fit theirs, and you know what I mean? To actually expand into that. So it's kind of interesting.
It's almost like a mutual.
What?
Sorry,
Yeah,
I was just going to say it's almost like
everybody thinks like that Jesus is actually not from. He's not Jewish.
It's the craziest thing ever. But, you can put artists and even the Romans, you can put them at fault here, deliberate fault, by the way, because to westernize things is a fairly new phenomenon. It didn't originate back there. So they were very aware where he was from. And if you think about the Romans, and now that's the seat of Christianity, I find that completely incredible, considering it was the Romans that killed him. It's like not the Jews that killed him. I know a lot of Christians, I've heard them sprout now and again, oh, the Jews, they killed Jesus. I was like, no, they didn't. It was the Romans.
Exactly. So yes, but it's funny because if you ask all Christians, they think actually the Jews killed.
That's what I just said. That's what I just said. They think that, and it was the Romans that did it, and it was Pontius Pilate specifically that did that. There's a lot of stuff made about that, but I've always felt that these two religions, Islam and Christianity, are actually jealous of. There's some, you know how you hear about, a mother and a child or a father and a child don't get on because they're too much alike.
Yes.
I think that's what these two are. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel that because growing up in Albania, I feel that you were not allowed to marry them. Because I'm on Christian side and we had the Muslims, so I had to deal with them all my life. So it's kind of funny how they judge each other so much. We're not allowed to marry into them or them into us. It's like so weird because if my aunt's daughter married a Muslim guy, and my whole family just like, oh, you can't talk to her. She married that.
Which is an interesting thing as well, right? Because
it's just crazy because there's nothing wrong with the other guy. He's like, you know what I mean? Just because he comes from that background, he doesn't, you know what I mean? they're not allowed to eat certain things and do certain things, and they're not accepted everywhere. So like it's kind of sad actually when we are all loved and all, we're all one really.
Well, there is that side of it. Like Christianity still has, and Catholicism specifically, I should say, still has a modicum of those rituals, but they treat them as a ritual. Like you've got Lent, right? And you've got Friday, you're not allowed to eat certain foods. They're all there. They're just treated differently. And
different times.
And they've evolved, I've got some Muslim clients and a couple of friends, and they've just been practicing or are practicing Ramadan right now, and I've had a Christian friend making really terrible comments about that. I said, well, you could do with a bit of that, because the whole process is about cleansing the body, of toxins. It's fasting. And the secondary nature of that fasting is to understand what people who have no food feel like every day. So it's allowing you to have more compassion for somebody who doesn't have food. We're not talking about doesn't have a house or doesn't have a car. We're talking about the basic life-giving sustenance of food. Exactly. So I think that's pretty amazing stuff. And they've all got this one thing that makes them an issue, is that one, controlling their people, which is the first thing. You're not allowed to marry outside of, and you've got to do this and that.
Yeah, you see what I mean? The control comes in, restrictions come in. And the food, it's okay about the food, because most people, like back on they didn't have enough food to feed their family, so obviously they are not going to we're not going to get meat to feed them. So they say, okay, this Friday you're not having meat. I grew up with that. And Friday we had food, we had the soup, soybean soup, and we wouldn't put meat on it. You would just put it with oil and stuff like that.
Right.
But you were not allowed to eat meat that day or dairy products, which is good, but you know what I mean? So, but it's it's different.
It is. It's not exactly evil stuff, right? But it becomes it's still a controlling factor. And when you go back, and I've said this a few times over the years, when you go back far enough, you could actually, like you just pointed out beautifully, Drita, there's often a very real, practical reason for what becomes a ritual in the end to honour that reason, but nobody remembers the reason. And you just said it. There's not enough meat around. And so you have a day without meat every week to ensure that you've got enough to last you through the winter or whatever that period of time is.
Yeah, because if you just killed a pig, it's like 200 kgs, but if you have 25 people in your household to feed and 9 kids, and you have to actually ration that very well to kind of survive and to feed your family. But that's how that is going. Exactly. And it's
No, that's a great point, because I think that's a lot of rituals are exactly that point. The point is that there was a point of practicality. I've watched, I'm trying to remember what it was. It was a documentary, and they were showing these big burial spires, and they went up into big mounds, and at the top they had a hollowed out area, 2 parts to that area, and the bottom was filled with stones, and it was always near the village but not too close. And they were these archaeologists were talking about these big spiritual, religious meanings, and I just looked and I thought, well, it makes sense to me, because they've got stony ground. They can't really bury anybody. That's not a do. They may not be able to or want to use wood, which might be sparse. Whatever they make fires with, they may not want to waste it, in other words, for burning somebody for days on end. And so they put them high where the smell goes away, right? It's not in your village. No matter which way the wind blows, it's above you. And the birds, carrion and animals can all access them and eat it, and they dry up very fast and all the rest of it. I just think some things are just born practical, and then we try to make something religious or spiritual out of it, because, I don't know, it seems to be, maybe because a lot of archaeologists are funded by Catholicism, or they're funded by religious structure, Judaism included, and then of course those that are getting that information need to keep their funding, right? And so maybe that's why they turn everything they can find into something spiritual when it was
to some spiritual or some kind of it's
go on.
I wonder what's going to go on from us now with all the things we're doing now. What kind of religion is going to be born in the future?
Well, religions haven't actually changed for thousands of years, so it becomes just a matter of when I do my segment, there is a point of trying to hold something, and I don't think it's so much anymore about controlling people. It's about keeping your funding, keeping yourself going. These things are a business in a modern world, you know.
That's right.
In a country like New Zealand, I don't know how many countries do this. I know a lot do, but any formal religion doesn't have to pay tax. That means they can make a lot of money, you know, and they don't have any of the responsibility of the taxpayer, but all of their money comes from those people who are paying taxes. So it's one of those interesting situations that it evolved beyond its origins. We will look
using the prophets. You're actually making money on it.
Totally,
you're using their name, you're using their teachings.
Exactly.
In their name, you know what I mean? That's yeah. It turned into big margin.
When you get into smaller towns in Australia, like way out of the way towns, there's outback and then there's little towns with hundreds of kilometres, sometimes at least 100 between them and the next town. You find that they were struggling to get people to go to churches. They'd have 2 or 3 churches, which is stupid. You've got a couple of hundred people or a couple of thousand at the most, and you've got 3 churches, and half of those people aren't religious at all or not going to church, even if they are. So they found they were really struggling. So they created something called the Unity Church, which is non-denominational. So if you've got a belief in God and you want to go and pray and you want to go to a church, anybody from any religion can go to their church because it's the only one for a long way. And that's how, interestingly, it started. We will do a show on this. We're going to go into some of the very old religions that brought towards us that whole wonderful sense of we've got a temple here, anybody can pray to their God anytime, there's no judgment. And that's what churches are not anymore, not at all. I'm going to talk about,
unfortunately.
But it's true, right? I'm going to talk about Ezekiel, because Ezekiel was a prophet who probably is the only prophet whose words influence current politics in Israel, actually, and in particular in Jerusalem, I guess. But Israel as a whole change their politics based on Ezekiel's prophecies, which is amazing. I'm only going to look at the little one today, the one of the chariot, which is still impacting through many spiritual practices. The wheel and the tarot and the chariot are both representative of this this vision. He actually wrote his prophecies, which were added to the Torah, which predates the Bible, and a lot of the Bible content comes from the Torah, but not all of it, just a fair whack of it. and that's the Jewish Bible, by the way, the only true Bible to my mind, and probably to their mind. Around about 592 BCE, 592 would be somewhere around 700 BC, maybe, and later added scripture to the Old Testament Bible. So what happened here was you got all these people writing things down, and their followers, their disciples, their whatever. He wasn't a priest, Ezekiel. He was just a regular guy. They would take their belief, they would take their writings, and later on, about 600 years after Christ died, another Roman emperor got involved, and his name was Constantine, and he said, we want all of these things put together to create a biblical verse. The Old Testament is more historical, and the New Testament is more allegorical. In other words, there's very little fact in it. There's just a lot of stories, and in some cases they don't even know who penned the books that they have now called the Bible, which is a really interesting phenomenon in itself. But essentially the Bible, as you know, it was put together by the Roman Empire, not the Roman Basilica, Vatican religion type thing. Constantine wasn't a Christian or a Jew. He was none of the above. He wasn't a Muslim either. He just chose he was actually an equal opportunity religious dude. Initially, Ezekiel's prophecies were about violence and destruction, and then he just stopped. After he had those, he became a priest, not before, but afterwards. And then about 13 years later, he fired up again, and then he was more about the faith, and this is the part that really is changing Israel today, in 2020, 2019, 2018, the laws and the rules that they've made, and the faith of Ezekiel, it was in the end, he was saying there would be ultimately a new establishment, a new covenant between God and the people of Israel. And this has had such a profound influence on the reconstruction and reorganization of Judaism that it can't help affect a country that is profoundly Jewish. So in the end, it's possibly the only predictive content that is actively evolving a politics, a government, and a country in our current world. While all the rest have got stuff said, nobody seems to be listening. Nobody seems to be responding to those. With those 2 periods that he had, he got so disturbed by his visions that eventually he stayed in a village and he wandered about naked. This is absolutely true historically. He wandered about naked. He would go and set up a sign And he started making these pictures because he felt that people just weren't listening to him. They didn't understand him.